want to present to you one of the most essential ideas from Michel Foucault. By understanding this one idea, you have a sense about what always works and to revolve around. But for this in order to happen, we have to understand one essential thing. And this is how history works. And so you can understand this idea better, think back of any time in history of what had happened. Think back of the people that had the most power in fact, the history is mainly written by the people that had the most attention, by the people that had the most amount of recognition. But this would be also true for the people that have the most amount of control over what is being communicated. Let's say if Hitler would have won the Second World War II, we would have a completely different understanding of what had happened during this war if he wouldn't have won. The thing is just, the people that in fact do have the most control over have also the most control over knowledge and what is being shared and what is being reproduced. So a form of thinking or knowledge that is not being recognized within the current society, that gains no much recognition or power, will actually get overwritten down by history. And this is where we have to understand the subject that writes and defines history. The subject that gives meaning throughout the entire world. Now when the subject is describing the world and trying to represent it something, we cannot perceive the subject that's drawing. Let's say we would understand a figure of history through their painting, through the words that were written about him. But we don't know the person who is writing them. Like sure, probably there may be the author, but when we try to understand history through the way we're learning it by reading history books, we're not looking at the person who is, much less the author that's writing it, but we let's mostly define it by the perspective of the other one. And so the person who tends to describe and write history is oftentimes the unperceived one. And this is really ironic because let's say we would come to understand this other person who wrote the history, we would need another person that would describe it. And we would not be certain of which perspective is true or not. Or not. This is really interesting because how can we know whether something is true or not? And this is where we come to understand one of Foucault's main idea, and that is power is mainly happening through knowledge. It's not the physical control, not the punishment that mostly tends to define what people do or what they don't do. It's through the means of knowledge that they know if I do this, I will get punished. If I do this, this thing will happen to me. And so by controlling knowledge, what Foucault says is being controlled possibility. Let's say you could go to school or you could not go to school. Now there isn't probably not a punishment depending on where you tend to live. But the main power that's being exercised through it is through not making the student consider that they cannot go to school, that people could not consider to make a certain decision. And so the way power is being organized is the way knowledge is being shared, and the way knowledge is being believed in. Now for Foucault, what's his main argument is that the reason why people acted that way and made what he would call nowadays unreasonable decision is much less of that they didn't have the history or the background to know a proper, but that the very way that they process information was different than we would nowadays. What Foucault tried to say is that, for example, in the Renaissance time, people process information mainly through resemblance. That how the stars would, for example, work would be like how the world would work, and everything is more like a semir or metaphor towards the entire existence. The same way during the classicist era, people mainly understood the world to representation. What is power? What is good? What is beauty? And it's more like a symbol that they tend to process it. And we could pretty much come to understand it through the way they communicated. Now, if you want more about this, we could consider reading the order of things, or I could make a video about it, so if you're interested. But the very way this knowledge is being processed has changed over time. Science, even also changing itself over time, changed the way we tend to understand things, and in the way we tended to process things. So to the question, right, why did the people during the Renaissance also could interconnect religion and esotericism with science, is because science was generally differently processed. And science 500 years ago was completely different, more or less different, than we would have it today. It's the basic processing of the knowledge which defines an era of time.